burnout is never about like your to-do list, where you live, your external circumstances ever. It's always an inner game. It's always an internal game. It's what's going on in the inside that most of the time we're not conscious of, right? Because as we know, at least 90% of our existence, of our reality, is very much played up at the subconscious level, which is why it's actually impossible to live a life that is well, happy, and healthy without knowing about your subconscious mind, learning about your subconscious mind, connecting with your subconscious mind, aligning with your subconscious mind.
Good morning, lovely Faye Lorwind, coming from Australia today, and used to be in New Zealand, but over there now. So you have quite a few titles, and you are considered to be a wellness coach. Your specialty in internal conflict resolution. You're an expert in that, honing in on anxiety, burnout, PTSD, chronic stress, family or social inflicted trauma, and I'm sure a myriad of other things as well. Having mastered the art of overcoming internal conflict yourself, how are you feeling today?
I'm good. Well, I'm good, and it's so nice to connect with you, Susie. Started off the day walking by the river here in Brisbane. We just made the move across the ditch, and we're in Queensland by the river. So feeling really, really good this morning, and bracing for a massive storm, which is a bit of a metaphor for life, eh? Like this morning, I was actually reflecting on how, it's just part of the cycle of our outer world reflecting our inner world and vice versa. So yes, very nice to be here with you.
That is so true. We are in what is being termed as the most interesting change time ever. And whilst, we are blessed to be here, oh my goodness, it's quite hard for people. And you must be seeing that or hearing that. But I want to actually step back in time now for your story as to how you came to be an internal conflict resolution expert. How did that happen?
Yeah, so it's by need. I don't think any of us that are in this wellness space actually dreamt of that, or I don't know many of us who, like in our earlier years or when we were in school and our teachers asked us, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know many people back growing up in the 70s and 80s who put up their hands and said, oh, I want to be an internal conflict resolution expert, or I want to be a trauma-informed clinical hypnotherapist. Like that wasn't where I had my sights set. But it's through a series of, life challenges and life tribulations where nothing seems to work for you and you're so determined to get better. And then you start on a journey or an inquiry of what does it take to live happily, well, and healthily. And then you're led to these different modalities that eventually help you recover. And the impetus or impetuses for me, if such word exists, is I had 3 burnouts, Susie. And for anybody who has experienced burnout or knows anybody who is experiencing burnout or on the cusp of burnout, you'll know that burnout isn't just about the feeling of like sheer exhaustion, like that bone dead tired feeling, although that's the most obvious manifestation of it. Because burnout is about a nervous system state that is in collapse, that is in shutdown, that is in freeze, many other functions come offline when the nervous system is in that state. So in my burnout states, my burnouts coexisted with chronic pain, with depression, with trouble sleeping, and of course the ruminative mind, the comparison with others, feeling directionless, feeling purposeless. But the very first burnout, the biggest kind of wake up moment and aha moment for me was when I was driving on my way to work. Now this was 16 years ago. I was living in the Caribbean. I was living on a gorgeous Caribbean island called Curacao. And it's a small Dutch island just off the coast of South America, actually. And the irony is, right, that I had my first burnout in a place where other people go to escape their stresses, right? In a place where other people go in order to, feel better. But this is the reason why I say this, Susie, is because burnout is never about like your to-do list, where you live, your external circumstances ever. It's always an inner game. It's always an internal game. It's what's going on in the inside that most of the time we're not conscious of, right? Because as we know, at least 90% of our existence, of our reality, is very much played up at the subconscious level, which is why it's actually impossible to live a life that is well, happy, and healthy without knowing about your subconscious mind, learning about your subconscious mind, connecting with your subconscious mind, aligning with your subconscious mind. So I was driving on my way to work one morning, and I basically lost control of the car. I passed out behind the wheel of the car, and the car went spinning, and it ended up on the other side of the road. And I was passed out just for like a few seconds, which seemed like hours. And of course, when I came to, I had absolutely no explanation for what had happened. There was like sheer fear. And how do you explain this to others when you don't understand it yourself? And at the time, I think I may have mentioned I was teaching little children at an international school in Curacao. And it's that shame of how do you show up to work? Because obviously I was late and completely disheveled. And there was no mobile phones at the time. So, you can't like just call somebody on the phone. So, you show up to work, and how do you explain that to people around you? It's kind of like saying, the dog ate my homework. It's like, yeah, right. Can you not come up with a better excuse? So that was the start of an inquiry into, well, what's creating these symptoms? Because when I started doing the medical rounds, I was very afraid initially to go see doctors, because I was convinced, Susie, that what was behind these symptoms, because there was also a lot of symptoms leading up to that fateful day behind the wheel of the car. I was convinced that the doctor was going to give me some kind of like diagnosis, neurological diagnosis that would be morbid and have an expiry date with it. And so I avoided seeing the doctor for weeks and weeks and weeks, but the symptoms kept getting worse. So, I would be sitting at my desk and I would pass out. I would be working out, I would pass out. There was nothing left in the tank. I mean, that is what happens in burnout. Your system completely runs out of fuel. And this is why you have these episodes of, you feel your world is spinning. You quite literally have unexplained vertigo. You pass out. You can sleep for 14 hours and still wake up feeling, dead exhausted. Your mind can never stop. And all of that is very, very much related to that nervous system in collapse, which of course I didn't know back then. So when I eventually made it to the doctors, at the prodding and with the loving care of a dear, dear friend, no doctor could actually explain my symptoms, right? Because what I didn't know back then is I was very much part of a demographic that seems to be very commonplace nowadays. There's a pretty scary demographic out there that says 90%, 90, of all doctors' visits today are due to an unexplained cause. Now, what that means is that, 9 out of 10 of us, when we go see a doctor, we're feeling lousy. We go see the doctor, and the doctor can't really explain why we're feeling the way that we feel. Yeah. And so we end up leaving, not just without a medical explanation for what's going on, but also without a solution for how to make it better, right? And so I was part of the demographic, obviously not knowing it. I knew nothing about the mind-body connection back then, nothing about the brain-body connection. I didn't even know that your thoughts actually impact your physiology and how you feel. I did not know that. I was living very, very much unconscious of the inner reality that basically shapes the quality of our life. So after about 8 doctors' visits, one doctor eventually diagnosed my symptoms as PTSD and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I immediately dismissed both diagnoses, Susie, because in my mind, again, not being educated about like the mind-body connection and the nervous system,
sure,
I had the association that, no, I can't be depressed because depression, I'm an optimistic person, I'm positive, I have a cheerful disposition, right? Because the association for me with depression is always like a gloomy demeanor, somebody who's pessimistic, somebody who looks at the cup as being half empty instead of half full. But again, that's also a myth because, again, depression isn't about a personality disposition and it's not about even brain chemistry. I'm talking clinical depression. Clinical depression is also a symptom of a nervous system that has completely run out of fuel due to an overwhelm and an overload of life experiences that have not been looked at and not been resolved. It's just a pileup of all of that stuff, all of those internal conflicts. And so I completely dismissed that, and therefore also dismissed the only solution that they had on offer at the time, which was antidepressants. And I thought, no, that's not for me at all. Mm-hmm. And the post-traumatic stress disorder, I also dismissed because, I thought, well, nothing traumatic has ever happened to me. Now, this is really where things get really interesting, again, because there's so many misconceptions out there around what trauma is and what trauma isn't. And I think because I always believed until that point that trauma was those big major life events that are life-threatening, like molestation or abuse. And because I had never experienced any of those, I dismissed that there could have been any trauma in my life. Now, here's where things get crazy. I'm Lebanese. I'm born into a civil war in the Middle East, like a civil war that spanned 17 years and claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions and millions of others. I was born into that. My nervous system was primed into that chaos and that confusion and that disaster and that dread. And yes, we were very much part of the fortunate demographic that ended up leaving shortly after the onset of the war. But what I didn't know is that I had taken those internal conflicts with me, those internal patterns of confusion and chaos with me as we moved around from country to country and continent to continent. I mean, when we left the war zone in Lebanon, we ended up living in the European countries of Cyprus and Greece, and then we were in Dubai, and eventually we immigrated to Canada, and then I went to study in the United States. So I was living in environments that are very much about peace and stability and freedom. But the internal reality did not mirror that and was not in alignment with that. But leading up to that big burnout, that fateful morning on the way to work where I passed out, so I went back to Lebanon, and I hadn't been to Lebanon in years and years and years and years. And because I was still a teacher at the time, I took the whole summer to be in Lebanon. And about 10 days into my stay in Lebanon, I completely fell in love with it, just being reunited with the family, the extended family, and also reunited with that Mediterranean lifestyle. I know that you've lived in that part of the world, and you know what that warmth is like. And
tell me about it.
It's just, it's so different, right? And it's it's foreign yet familiar. It was very familiar at a very deep soul level. I completely fell in love with it. And about 10 days into my stay in Lebanon, I thought, since I'm close, let me just hop over to Istanbul, Turkey for a few days before going back to Lebanon and then finishing off my summer vacation there. Well, that trip ended up to not play out the way I had intended it, because 2 days into my stay in Istanbul, the Israeli invasion of 2006 happened. And the airport shut down and I couldn't get back into the country. Mm-hmm. And I tried every possible way. While everybody was trying to leave Lebanon and escape Lebanon, I was trying everything to get back into Lebanon, because I could not bear the thought of being torn away from my country and my family yet again. And what I did not know was happening underneath the surface is that event and that experience in 2006 triggered and brought to the surface all of those other older memories and experiences and events of loss and separation and sadness and grief. And of course, I wasn't aware of those. And so it's not surprising that, because none of that had been dealt with, neither in the past nor in that moment in 2006, that many weeks later, I would find myself in the situation that I found myself in, where my world was quite literally spinning, quite literally out of control, and I had run out of fuel because all of that pile up of stuff from like decades and decades and decades had not been looked at. And so that's basically what started the journey, Susie. It was like get on the antidepressants, go to talk therapy to talk about all of the psychological issues and difficulties you're having in your life. And I tried the psychologist for, it was actually a psychoanalyst. I tried that for 2 sessions, and I actually felt worse after leaving every session than I did walking in, because I was going round and round and round in circles talking about what wasn't right in my life and how I felt about it. But and again, with no viable solution or way forward to how I want to feel instead. I wasn't even asked once, well, how do you want to feel instead? It was like, well, let's go back and let's talk about everything that had happened. And that's obviously, we know that's not where the solution never lies in the story. And so, if I said no to the medication and I said no to the therapy, that didn't leave me with many choices because I knew nothing back then. And so all I knew was that there has to be a better way, a way that didn't involve medication, that had no side effects, that was natural, that was good for me, and that was long lasting. And so I started an inquiry. I started reading and studying and going to seminars and doing workshops and doing trainings and just kind of like applying things to myself, to my own healing journey. And it took a lot longer than it should have, because I didn't know I didn't have a system. I didn't know what to try and what to throw out. I didn't have any accountability. I had no structure. I had no guidance. And so when all the symptoms resolved eventually, and they did, and they not only did they resolve, but like the transformations and the openings that happened afterwards were actually quite remarkable. I put together everything that worked on my healing journey, and I encoded it into a simple 3-step system that takes you from like poor mental health, sheer exhaustion, burnout, pain, to a place of feeling like yourself again, feeling like you're in control, feeling calm, happy, and confident. And I know that was a long, long, long way to get to answer your story.
No,
that provides us with some kind of a starting point, but also some seeds for your listeners to consider if they happen to fall in that demographic of like being in the 90% going to the doctor and not having a solution for what's going on.
And also that in your case, it was the long shadow of war, actually conflict in society that was at birth. Presumably, am I right in thinking that your parents just wanted to get out and not think about it anymore? So you were raised in this kind of your lucky, bright sunshine. We're not going to talk about that kind of environment. And did you have siblings? Do you have siblings?
Yes, well, I have 2 siblings. I'm the eldest. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. So I was 5 when we left, and my younger brother was 3, and my little sister was like 2. And so when that civil war happened, this was like the 3rd conflict in a span of 8 years in the region. So they thought that this was just like a little skirmish that would die down like the other 2 skirmishes had. So they didn't anticipate that this would end up, dragging out as long as it did. So they stayed put initially. But Susie, what happened was my father, because we're Christian Arabs, my father was kidnapped 3 times. From like the start of the Civil War till about, so the Civil War started in April of 75 and we fled in April of 76, so a year. So within that year, he was kidnapped 3 times. And the last time he was kidnapped, so the first 2 times it would be like a few hours. I mean, still bad enough, but again, because of that resilience, that love for country, that belief, that this is just a fleeting thing and better days are ahead, they ended up staying. But the last time he was kidnapped with 35 other people. So there was 36 of them that were kidnapped, and they were in captivity. He was in captivity for 34 days. Every single day, they would like shoot somebody in front of the group. Like, could you imagine? Like, Susie, can you imagine? And the thing is, my father is not very, like, he's not religious person. He's not religious at all, actually. But, he is a proud man, and
Oh,
they would bring the Bible to him and they say, spit on the Bible, and he wouldn't. And so they would beat him. And I mean, you can imagine, like, that literally broke my father. But again, being of that culture and of that generation, do you think he's ever dealt with his trauma? Not at all.
no.
Like, my father has so much chronic pain, so much anger, addictions. Like, it's actually quite heartbreaking and quite tragic, Susie. And it's only now he's in his late 80s, it's only now that I sometimes hear about, oh, these pains and these aches could be because of the captivity. It's quite interesting, eh? Like, that never leaves our consciousness. Those things never leave our consciousness, and they're always looking for an outlet and for expression. And so, he was very fortunate that his life was saved. And, the story, the narrative that we heard repeatedly, which then became, our belief system, and we would repeat on autopilot, was, we left the war early on, we were unaffected by the war. And sure, while we were very fortunate to not live the day to day and in and out of that horrible, horrible conflict, to say that a person, a child, an individual is not impacted by conflict is just so untrue. And like, when I look now at the state of the Middle East, or not just the Middle East, or look at the state of, the Ukraine, or I just look at the state of all parts of the world where there's conflict. Okay, it's not armed conflict. I know what that's doing internally to people at a nervous system level, because here's the thing, you do not need to be born into a war zone. You do not need to be born into like an armed conflict in order to experience conflict and dread on the inside, right? Like, we're all fighting some kind of internal battle. We all have some kind of internal chaos or internal turmoil, the root cause of which could come from so many different sources. But it's that internal turmoil that actually is quite keeping us stuck, keeping our nervous system stuck, and keeping us blocked from whatever we want to experience. So, when you ask about what it is that I do and how I present, when I say internal conflict resolution, because I know, after studying so many modalities and after been on this journey for 16 years, Susie, I know that the reason why we're not experiencing whatever it is we want to experience is because there is a huge internal turmoil and chaos that is blocking us and that is keeping our systems quite literally stuck and stuck in the past. And so when we're stuck in the past, we're stuck with the story of the past. We're not stuck with the version of reality of the future. And until you unscript that and clean that up, it's actually quite difficult or lengthy or unenjoyable to connect with that version of the future.
It's an interesting phrase. You unscript that and clean it up, because in fact you can't change the past. It's happened. That story is there, but one holds on to it for as long as one wants to. It can be let go of.
I mean, that when I look at the older generation, the generation of my parents, I'm talking about the Lebanese generation of my parents. It's very tragic, Susie, and all of them. And this is not a judgment, it's simply an observation that comes from knowing what I now know and the work that I do. All of them are carrying so much chronic stress that shows up in their lives, like broken families, broken relationships, massive addictions. There are so many addictions in our culture. So much chronic conditions, chronic pain, issues with sleep, depression. But 80% of the people in my country are on antidepressants.
Wow.
And of course, it's very explainable and very understandable. But here's the irony: like, when I go back to Lebanon, and I've been back a couple of times, and I run like workshops and retreats there, and I share my story, there's so much resistance to a potential correlation between their lived experience of the war and their current struggles with anything chronic and anything that's not going right in their world. It's amazing. It's
Why?
amazing.
In this day and age, why is that resistance
And
there?
I think I understand it because of where I was when in that doctor's office in 2006 when he said you've got post-traumatic stress disorder. And I said that's not possible because I've never experienced anything traumatic, because the association was always cognitive, of course, that I'm fortunate, I wasn't affected, I left the war and I survived the war. And I think for so many people that have survived the war and are still there, they know of so many people who didn't make it. They know of so many stories of like destructions of lives, livelihoods, businesses, homes. But if they're still standing, they are so grateful for that, that they dismiss any other possible
Right on.
losses or impacts that their experience may have had on them internally. There is a demographic of people who are open to the possibility, but yeah, the resistance is very much there. But you know, take away the conversation of like a war zone or like Gaza or the Middle East, because that's not the lived experience of probably
No.
many of your listeners, thankfully. But we see that resistance like with people who haven't lived through a war zone, like because it takes a lot of, it's uncomfortable encountering our shadow. It's uncomfortable being with the parts of us that are dysfunctional. It's confronting to confront ourselves. And so if on the surface level things are okay, like why rock the boat? I'll just keep going. And sometimes, things have to be really painful and really uncomfortable before we're really forced to take a look at ourselves and start making changes.
Sadly, that's true. And I think war zone, I mean, let's use it as a metaphor. There's plenty of people who grew up in their households being a war zone. There are plenty
Mm, mm, mm.
it's a metaphorically, it's the same, it's not uncommon. And the fear is interesting, that you say, I don't want to look at this, because there's a sense that some people feel that they will be reliving the pain by looking at it.
I just want to share something that may be helpful as a reframe or as a reassurance for anybody listening to this who is experiencing what you're saying, because I know that's a very, very real concern, and I hear that as well. And here's the thing about the subconscious mind, because right, all of these issues, right, the causes for all of these issues are started in the subconscious, all of them. Like nobody wakes up in the morning and says, oh, you know what, today I'm going to have a day of difficulty, I'm going to have a day of struggle, I'm going to have a day of poor concentration or lack of motivation, or a day where I have headaches. Like no, nobody does that. But there's a reason why the body and the mind are behaving that way, and the reason and the explanation are up stored in the subconscious, right? This is why I think it's so important that if you're looking to improve the quality of your life, but also especially if you're looking to overcome these chronic conditions, that you learn about your subconscious mind and you start kind of aligning with your subconscious mind, because that's where all of the solutions and the resources lie. So one of the things that the subconscious mind does, it has 21 job descriptions, or we call it in neurolinguistic programming 21 prime directives. So it's like 21 functions, right?
Mm-hmm,
One
mm-hmm.
of the functions of the subconscious mind is that it will always present things for resolution. Now, what does that mean? It means that if something is coming up for you, it means that your subconscious mind knows that you're ready in order to look at it, process it, and integrate it, because it wants you to be whole and it wants you to flourish. And the only way that we can flourish and thrive is when we're whole and integrated, right, Susie? Like we can't flourish and thrive when we're when we're conflicted, or when we're disconnected, or we're ignoring parts of ourselves, or parts of our lives. So if something is coming up, if there's a whisper inside your mind, or a sense that you need to be looking at something, or that you're thinking about something, or that there's a memory coming up, or a thought coming up, that's coming from your subconscious mind. And it's coming from your subconscious mind because your subconscious mind wants you to restore wholeness, and it will only present things for you when it knows that you are ready in order to take that step. And if you think about it, like, we hear so many stories, I see it all the time in my work, but we hear so many stories of, all these repressed memories and all these repressed emotions, like from childhood or beyond, it just coming spontaneously coming up for people. Well, why is that? They're spontaneously coming up because now the subconscious mind understands that, okay, you're in a position and in a place where you've got the internal resources and the space in order to look at this, in order to move towards restoration, in order to move towards integration, and to move towards wholeness.
It is really interesting you say that, because I do believe that we nature's a pretty amazing thing, and nature does not create, we are not created to not thrive. Why would we be born? Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So our natural inclination is to be whole and thriving and fulfilling our destiny here. But there are people who have this internal belief that they are not worthy of thriving, that nothing has ever been good for them, therefore that was meant to be for them. And it's just not the case, right?
And it's so tragic that actually behind all in the work that I do, when we get to, like when we unpeel, like what are the root causes of what's keeping you stuck, there's always some kind of manifestation of the I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, there's something wrong with me. And really, the work is about defalsifying that. It's about not just releasing it, but not just releasing it and challenging it, but also then reconnecting you with the truth of your greatness. And this is where, because thankfully, like, your listeners, they are open to understanding that in this universe, we're not alone, and we've got a cosmic support system. And really, without the cosmic support system, really, we don't stand a chance. Then the work is helping them feel on the inside, like as a somatic embodied experience, what it's like to be in the light, and what it's like to be in the light and the truth of their greatness, and the light and the truth of their divinity. And isn't it so? And I'm on my own journey right now, spiritual journey right now, to find my truth with a capital T. And when I started encountering those challenges and those difficulties in 2006, I was in my late 30s. And the deeper I went into, well, what does it take to be happy, healthy, and well, eventually my journey led me to, like yoga and meditation, which were so healing for me on so many levels. And that was my first encounter with spirituality. And I love the feeling of knowing that the divinity out there is actually inside, and I don't need to go to a church or kiss a cross or read a Bible in order to experience my wholeness. Like, I loved it. So for a while, I went down the whole path of yoga, and like many people in the West, like exploring Buddhism as well. But it came to a point where that didn't feel complete enough for me either. And so I continued on my journey of inquiry, and then I came across the work of non-dualism when I started studying IREST, integrative restoration, which is just the most incredible practice. And that's really where I delved deep into the nervous system and into somatics. And I had, for the first time, an experience of what it's like in the body, not intellectually, but in the body as an internal feeling, to feel whole and well and purposeful and resilient. And IREST, or integrative restoration, is based on the practices of non-dualism, and oneness with a capital O. And so this practice has remained for me personally, and now I weave that into my work in internal conflict resolution. But then I came across A Course in Miracles. So after the lockdowns in New Zealand and the horrible situation, like with the mandates, and I was one of those people that made the very unpopular decision not to get vaccinated, which was a very, very, very painful time. I became really disillusioned. I had horrible experiences with people. I think many people who made that unpopular decision would know what I'm talking about. So I was looking for something to wipe away the sorrows of my soul, and I asked for a sign, and I was led to A Course in Miracles. And I've been doing A Course in Miracles now for 2 years, and it's been really, really, really incredible. And what I've now come to understand is, and I now have the courage that maybe comes from conviction to relay it to my clients, is we really don't stand a chance of living a truly well, healthy, fulfilling, happy life if we're not tapped into some kind of cosmic support system. It can't happen, right?
Exactly.
And the clients that come to me are very much in the very much left brain, linear. Give me the science. Don't talk to me about God. Don't talk to me about the higher power. Don't talk to me about spirituality, which is totally fine. I meet people where they are. But the further, once you start exploring all aspects of yourself and releasing stories and judgments, you become more open to accepting that you're really not in control. And it's a lot harder, and it takes a lot longer if you're just doing it by yourself and relying on yourself and not kind of seeking some kind of support.
Exploring. Yeah.
Yes. I've done so much study into rewiring, reprogramming. That's really the work that I do. And I really have to say that I think it is one of the most effective rewiring, repatterning, reprogramming programs or tools out there. I think it's a spiritual practice for the times, for a secular life. It's beautiful.
So you've really dived deep into a whole lot of different modalities, and it feels to me, and am I right, you're still honing, and that's helpful for us.
Oh, thank you. I feel very grateful to be able to bring to the world experiences that are supportive at a time where so many people are struggling needlessly. Because I think when you understand the root cause of the dysregulation that so many people experience nowadays, as depression, IBS, fibromyalgia, insomnia, burnout, when you understand that and you understand what it takes to reverse engineer it, you don't have to suffer in silence. You don't have to live that way. And it does not need to take you years and years and years to come out of it. It doesn't, because actually wired to thrive. Our brain, our nervous system, our subconscious mind, our soul, our spirit, our divine plan actually are there for us to thrive and to flourish. So it's bioavailable to us, right? But we just need to know which buttons to push and which buttons to dial down. And yes, it's taken me 16 years because I didn't know what I was doing. But now I know which buttons to push. I know which dials to work with. So, the absolute longest that I work with someone, Susie, the absolute longest is 3 months. But usually it doesn't take more than about 8 weeks working on a one-on-one capacity. And then, in my group coaching program, it's 66 days. And the reason why it's 66 days is because the research now tells us that it takes more longer than the 28 to 21 or 28 days that we're all programmed into believing it takes to create change. Because if you think about anything you've tried to change, we were told, oh, if you do it for 21 days, it will stick. If you do it for 28 days, it will stick. Then they said, if you do it for 35 days, it will stick. But I don't know about you. I know I've tried, and many people I know have tried doing something for 21, 28, or 35 days and it didn't stick. And then they think that there's something wrong with them. Well, there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that we don't have the right, up to date, current information about how long it takes for a pattern to stick. And now we know that it's 66 days. If you do something, whatever it is you want to do, and you want to automate a habit, if you do it every day for 66 days, eventually it will stick. It will become second nature, and it will become part of what your subconscious mind does for you, freeing you up to attend to other things that you want to attend to. So that's why the group program is 66 days, and then on a one-on-one basis, like, it really never takes more than about 8 weeks.
And we've spent an awful long time with these core beliefs in this life, let alone anything else that's come through, or generational core beliefs that we've brought through at a cellular level from this particular genetic line that you're born into. Of course, there's a lot of undoing there, so it's not going to happen overnight, but it doesn't have to take that long either.
And I just want to go back to something that you were saying about, like, modalities. Because I've studied so many modalities and I've incorporated many of them into my work. The reason why I do that is because, in my observation, I haven't found a single modality to be truly comprehensive enough. Mm-hmm. And when you're dealing with, like, a chronic stress condition, like, issues with sleep or issues with fatigue or depression or burnout, like, that issue affects how you feel in your body, how you feel in your thoughts, how you operate, the habits, the choices you make in your lifestyle, your emotions, your subconscious mind, and your nervous system. And that's why the approach that I take to resolving this is integrative, because you need an integrative solution in order to completely resolve that issue in all facets of your life.
And it's working, right? You're actually, the beauty of your work you're doing, you're seeing results, which is
I feel so grateful that I'm able to turn something that was, pretty harrowing into something that can provide hope for others. And I think that during this time of massive unpredictability in the world, massive unfamiliarity, where there's a growing number of that 90% demographic now are open to other solutions. I find that super exciting. Like, just in the past 10 years, how many people's consciousness has completely exploded, right? And people are actively searching for solutions and treatments and modalities that are outside the norm and outside the mainstream. And I think that's really exciting. And I think in the next 10 years, I think what you and I do will probably become, like, first point of call, not last point of call. Yeah.
It's kind of exciting. And that, as you say, that acceleration is really fast, which is good. That needs to happen, as long as people do hear that there's another way of being. As you asked way back when, there's got to be another way.
It's the surrendering, right? Yes. Like, asking guidance for direction and next steps.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Well, my dear, thank you so much. I feel like
so nice to talk to you,
Susie. Lovely. And what would you like to leave people with? What gem would you like to leave people with today?
make it a habit to spend daily moments of stillness and silence with yourself. And in those moments of daily stillness and daily silence, it's amazing the amount of downloads that you'll receive. And it's amazing the amounts of insights you'll get about the next step that you need to take, or the next steps you need to take, or what you need to start doing, or what you need to stop doing, or what you need to continue doing. Because really, like when we hear that cliche that we have the answers to everything we're looking for on the inside, it's true, but those answers can't reveal themselves to us when we're living like in a frenzied rush and when we're going from one thing to the other. You know, like we just need to be still and quiet and pause. So really, like there's nothing more life-changing than cultivating a few moments of daily stillness and daily silence where you're in communion with your thoughts and with your inner guidance.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you.